Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Let's stay on the UK economy. Inflation slowing less than expected last month as fuel prices crept higher, underscoring the reluctance of central banks to actually begin cutting rates. Well, here to discuss the UK's economic outlook is the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond. Mr. Hammond, thank you for joining us. I mean, we talk about the economy, but also you're also Defense Secretary, and it almost feels almost more important in this day and age with all of the uncertainty and the defense spending. Would you, first of all, agree with former defense secretaries that we just have to increase defense spending now?
Well, I think we will have to increase defence spending in a measured way over a period of time. And I think a great deal depends on, post the American elections, what the position of the US is around NATO in Europe and how clearly we can rely on the continuing guarantee of the American alliance in the defence of Europe in the future against potential Russian aggression. But there's no doubt we're not spending enough on defence. None of us are spending enough on defence. And we're going to have to factor that into what is already a very difficult public spending agenda for the UK.
So what happens to UK defence and European defence if Donald Trump is, for example, elected and says, actually, NATO needs reforming and we're going to give a lot less to it?
Then the Europeans have to step up and fill the gap. And that's quite a big gap to fill because we're heavily dependent on the Americans for many strategic elements of our defence. I don't just mean the nuclear deterrent, but the ability to airlift large numbers of troops, for example, depends crucially on American support. So we would need to invest quite a lot more money in defence. I think the important thing here is that the overall envelope of public spending cannot continue to expand. So when we talk about these things that we have to do, decarbonisation, increasing our defence spending, we also have to talk about what we are going to do less of in order to be able to afford these things. That's the grown-up debate. And to be very honest with you, it's quite difficult to get that debate going in an election year.
So how would you do it? You're always look at the numbers and always try to balance out. First of all, defense, does it need to go to 3% of GDP or is 500 million one-off enough?
Not yet 3% of GDP. And money isn't the only issue. We've also got to be able to recruit enough people. At the moment, the defence establishment is struggling to recruit the people it needs to spend its current budgets, to use its current budget allocations. So the two things go hand in hand. But I think, look, go back to what the Chancellor was just saying about growth. In the end, this is all about growth. If we have strong, consistent economic growth driven by productivity increases, not just by a growing population, then we will be able to afford to do more, including over time, more public spending. But first of all, we have to get that growth equation right. And although it looks like we are now getting on top of the inflation problem, which has been the predominant theme for the last couple of years, we still have this long-term challenge in the UK that our productivity growth has been very flat ever since the global financial crisis. And our economic growth is simply not strong enough to support an ageing population with a very sharply rising demand for public services.
But so how do you actually fix the productivity problem? The U.S. productivity numbers are a little bit better because of a large number of immigrants actually coming to the country. Does AI help with productivity? How would you go around it?
Technology can indeed help with productivity, but we've got to make sure that we adopt and innovate in the right way. That we seize the opportunities that are available. I agree with the Chancellor. I think the UK growth prospects are significant. We've got a very good track record of technology adoption. British people are very open to using technological innovations in their everyday lives, more so than in many other countries. So the raw material is there, but we've got to make sure we seize the opportunity. And one of the challenges of democracy, of course, is that we have to persuade people that they want things to change. And people are very conservative with a small c, often don't like change. And it's about selling change to people, working out how in a democracy we have those big debates and we reach the right long-term decisions around these big, difficult issues. Because many of our adversaries and even many of our friends around the world who are competitors with us don't operate the same kind of democratic system, don't have to build the same kind of consensus that we do in the liberal democracies of Europe.
So one of the more immediate, and these are longer-term, extremely difficult subjects, very important. On the short term, I mean, does it make more sense to increase defense spending or cut taxes? And that could also lay the foundation, actually, for future growth either way.
Well, look, I'm strongly in favour of an agenda to cut taxes over time as we can afford to do so. But we can only cut taxes if our public spending is less than our tax receipts. Driving economic growth, achieving higher levels of economic growth should increase tax receipts and should ultimately enable us to have both lower taxes and higher spending on public services, including things like defence. But we've got to do things in the right order. First, you grow your economy, and that requires investment, maybe at the expense of consumption. But the consistent theme, if you look across countries around the world that have achieved decent levels of economic growth over long periods of time, the consistent theme is high levels of saving and high levels of investment. And we've got to do better in that area. Once we've done that, and we're running surpluses in our public finances, then we can start looking at cutting taxes. I'm afraid, as Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng demonstrated a couple of years ago, trying to do it the other way around, cutting taxes first, funding it by borrowing, simply doesn't work.
When you look at UK defence and foreign policy, should the UK continue to sell arms to Israel if they are in breach of international law?
Well, we have a very clear and strict regime about who we can and can't sell arms to, and these things are reviewed very intensively when there's a period of conflict or disturbance going on in the world. So, it's not for me to second guess that judgment that will be made internally within government according to the rules. But we have one of the strictest arms export regimes in the world, and I'm confident that it'll be operated properly. Often people on the outside say, well, it's obvious you shouldn't be selling arms to this country or that country. Things are often a little bit more complex than that in terms of the way international law works and the way the rules are applied.
When you look at, we're on tenterhooks, and this was quite difficult 4 days in the Middle East trying to understand how Israel retaliates if they retaliate. Do you think the Prime Minister will?
Which Prime Minister?
Netanyahu.
The Prime Minister of Israel. Look, I think it's very difficult for Israel not to retaliate in some form to this Iranian action. Prime Minister Netanyahu will be getting urged from all sides, including the UK, to ensure that any response is moderate and non-escalationary. I honestly don't believe the regime in Tehran wants to provoke an all-out war with the United States and Israel. That is not in their interest, but they also have their domestic audience that they have to satisfy. Prime Minister Netanyahu is in the same space. He has a very difficult domestic balancing act, and that's one of the big drivers in the evolving geopolitical situation in the Middle East. The trick, which the Americans in particular will be working on at the moment, is finding an action that the Israelis can take which satisfies Israel's amour propre without provoking Iran into a further counter-response. I don't know what that is, but I hope very much that they manage to find something that works.
Okay, speaking about your Prime Minister, the UK Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is there a chance actually that the Tories do something that will not be a complete wipeout at the next general election?
Well, look, there's always a chance because the world is an unstable and unpredictable place. And lots of things could happen between now and the autumn when the election will probably be held. I think it's what the Chancellor has said to you is probably right, that the feel-good factor will be starting to creep back into the economy. So the economic situation after a very difficult few years post-COVID will start to look and feel a bit better. But we've got a long way to go, let's be honest. The polls are suggesting that the Conservative Party has a mountain to climb at the next election. But never say never, because events can change people's minds very quickly.
But is it possible for the Conservative Party to win it on the economy?
I think it's a challenge, to be honest, because I think although I think the economy will be improving by the autumn, I think that many people have in their minds the events of the autumn of 2022, the mini budget, the spike in interest rates and so on. And, you know, the Tory party's principal pitch to the public has always been our responsible management of the economy. I trust Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak completely on responsible management of the economy, but I think what has happened in the recent past has damaged that brand, to be honest, and we've got to rebuild it.
Does it matter if the election is too close to the US election? Would that worry you?
No, I suspect our election will be close to the US election. I think the question is whether it's just before or just after.
Does it make a difference?
I really am not sure. I'm not sure whether it makes a huge difference.
Philip Hammond, thank you so much for joining us today. That was the former UK Chancellor of the Exchequer.